Welcome back, my dear viewers. I was just wrapping up some research on a rather morbid topic, death itself. Yes, an average Monday night at the lab, as it were. But then I started to ponder the other side of that coin, life, and how one might be able to pass on, but in reverse. Better strap in, dear viewers, because today's topic is a doozy. Necromancy, nonsense, or nonfiction. Necromancy, derived from the late Latin term necromantia, is a term used for the actions of someone who communicates with the dead, or in later media examples of Dungeons & Dragons and Diablo franchise as well as many others, the term is used for those who use dark magics to bring the dead back to life, usually in the form of maggot-infested zombies and their more classy counterpart, the skeleton. We'll be focusing on the raising of the dead part today. While necromancy resides mostly in the realm of fiction, I can assure you that there are many real-world examples of the dead returning to life. As a matter of fact, it can happen randomly. But before we get to that, it really wouldn't be a video about resurrection if we didn't mention the patron saint of zombies, Lazarus. Lazarus of Bethany was a biblical figure who is resurrected in his tomb after being unalive for 4 whole days, and his name is invoked in modern media anytime a return of life is involved. In fact, there's even a medical term under that name. Lazarus syndrome is a term that refers to the spontaneous circulation of blood that occurs after CPR ends. This miraculous return has led to many awkward/uncomfortable situations, like the one in 2014 where a woman was mispronounced no longer living and woke up in a morgue freezer, or the one in that same year where another woman was declared unalive after a drug overdose. She woke up in the operating room for organ harvesting. Scientists still don't understand why this incredibly rare event happens, but as always, they have their hypotheses. Air pressure. A lot of pressure is built up in the chest during CPR, which can block veins and major arteries. And once that's done, the pressure begins to leave, allowing the blood to start circulating properly again. Drugs. Some doctors and scientists have attributed the jumpstart of circulatory activity to drugs like adrenaline, which are delivered via IV in some CPR sessions. Hyperkalemia. Scientists have even guessed that high levels of potassium in the blood, or hyperkalemia, has something to do with Lazarus syndrome. No one's seen the event occur enough to secure concrete evidence of why it happens, but happens it does. As I just mentioned, Lazarus syndrome can land you into some tricky situations like the previous 2 examples. But in less recent times, you could wake up 6 feet under in your very own claustrophobic nightmare. I speak of premature burials in which a person would be falsely pronounced living impaired and buried as one does with most corpses. The victim is then left to scream and frantically scratch at the lid of their own coffin in complete darkness, as they gulp down the last drops of air before realizing that they're right where they're supposed to be, as they let out one final gasp in the dark. Needless to say, after word got around that some folks were buried prematurely in the 19th century's cholera pandemic and horror master Edgar Allan Poe released his 1844 book, Premature Burial, the fear of those premature burials peaked. In order to help combat those fears, engineers and artisans set to work developing safety coffins, which provided ways for the unwilling occupant of the pall to let people topside know that they're still alive. One such pine box had a pulley system that would allow the victim to pull a string in their coffin to ring a bell. If they woke up from their forever nap, other models included ladders, escape hatches, and even feeding tubes. But many of them forgot to implement a breathing tube. On a positive note, the modern medical industry has defined the differences between clinical death and biological and set in place procedures for Lazarus syndrome. Like something as simple as waiting 10 minutes before making any declarations. Although the odds of you waking up in a freezer or an operating room are reduced, they're never zero. Now, if you're of the same opinion that I am, then you're not one to leave something as important as your own resurrection up to chance. Luckily for you, immortality is in high demand, and scientists across the globe are researching ways to make it a reality. One way of coming back from the great beyond is to preserve the body for resurrection at a later date. The most popular method in this category is cryonics, or the preservation of human bodies using low-temperature freezing. To put it another way, experts of cryonics are basically necromancers who have spec'd into cold magic trees. The main idea behind cryonics is that once frozen, shortly after the Reapers punched your time card, you'll remain frozen until science develops a way to throw an Uno reverse card at mortality, or whatever disease ailed you. It sounds simple, hmm? Unfortunately, there's a lot more to it than just thawing you out. Not only do you have to worry about permanent damage from vitrification, and the toxic cryoprotectants that keep your cells from forming into sharp crystals and bursting your veins wide open, you have capitalism to worry about as well. Let's say that you spent up to $200,000 to make arrangements with a cryogenics company to keep you on ice after your inevitable demise. And now let's also say that you were one of the volunteers of one of the 3 other companies that didn't survive and went out of business by 2018. What happens to you then? Likely the same thing that happened to hundreds of others in that 2-year span. You'll be defrosted and disposed of as the company crumbles. Talk about a corporate meltdown. Some of you out there may be thinking of something along the lines of, couldn't I just upload my consciousness to a computer after I bite the big one and live there forever? You and Alexei Turkin, who is an author, extensionist, and transhumanist researcher from Moscow, must be 2 birds of a feather. Alexei believes that one day AI sciences will advance to the point where human consciousness can be uploaded and transferred by supercomputers. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Living a pain-free existence in paradise forever. If I were a more spiritual skeleton, I would say that's an exact description of heaven. But I'm not, and I'm going to ruin it for you. First off, the power needed to upload consciousness is astrological, and I mean that in an almost literal sense. In order to power the calculation engines to run a simulation along with every human's consciousness 100% intact, you would need the power output of a Dyson sphere, which is an object in theoretical science that is built around a star to fully harness its energy. Even I'm not crazy enough to expect that to happen within the next few centuries. And secondly, there's an identity crisis that's sure to ensue. And in order to explain this problem in a way everyone here can easily understand, I'm going to reference a video game. More specifically, a fun psychological horror game called Soma. We'll be heading into spoiler territory, so I'd recommend playing that first if you're interested. Don't worry, the rest of us can wait. Now, for the rest of you, in Soma, you play as Simon Jarrett after he survives a car accident in 2015. As all good test subjects do, he signed on to an experimental brain scan that could help him recover from his injuries. Right after said scan, he wakes up from a blackout in an underwater research facility called Pathos 2 in the year of 2104, after a comet impact caused an extinction event. After finding Site Lambda, Simon realizes that the person guiding him is just a brain scan planted in a robot, and that he himself was uploaded into the modified robotic corpse of an employee of the station. He was tasked with launching the Ark, which was the last remnant of humanity on one of those cyber paradises I mentioned earlier, and if that was destroyed, humanity would vanish. So after trials and tribulation, Simon finally reaches the Ark, and he uploads himself and Catherine into it before launching the payload into space to live out an eternity of peace together in a new cyber world. Only to realize in the same instant that he's been left to rot at the bottom of the sea, in the solitude of complete darkness until the end of time. Therein lies the problem with uploading yourself into a computer. You've just made a copy of yourself to live on in your stead. Now you see how exact soul transfer can be a tricky business. Oh, by the way, cryonics and AI reconstruction are just 2 methods on Alexei and Chernikov's map of methods for resurrection of the dead. It scales potential methods based on plausibility, starting from cryonics to literally being resurrected by the hand of God. Alexei and Chernikov even co-wrote a whole paper to go along with the map, so I'll leave that in the description for my fellow mega nerds out there. So, as you can see, necromancy isn't quite an exact science yet, but the line between life and death gets thinner every day. Until next time, my dear viewers, stay healthy. Thank you so much for sticking around at this point. If you'd like to keep track of announcements for the show, or my day-to-day shenanigans and quips, follow me on Twitter. And if you don't mind, feel free to go support the show on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Every contribution counts. Thank you all again, and see you next time.